Holy City Center Radio, this is episode 382, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, June 13th, 2025. That's right, it's Friday the 13th. A little spooky day out there. Stay safe and have fun. I hope you have an amazing weekend. If you need plans, go to holycitycenter.com/calendar. And you can see what is going on this weekend and beyond. Let's hope our Fridays, collectively this Friday the 13th, isn't too bad. Although, is this a harbinger of things to come? I'm having to record this as a voice memo on my iPhone instead of my normal equipment because the server I use to record things and then send to producer extraordinaire Lindsay Collins is not working. So let's hope this is not a sign of things to come. My second issue with technology over the last couple days, the other one involves trying to play video games over the internet with my brother. You know, he lives in Connecticut. We like to catch up by playing video games and chit-chatting as we do it. And I couldn't connect to the server, so we couldn't catch up in our normal way. So let's hope all these little issues I'm having, that means there must be a third one, but hopefully it won't be too bad. And let's hope your Friday the 13th aren't doing. What's the plural? Fridays the 13th. I hope you all have a great day and a great weekend. So no more delays. Let's get into the latest news. And yeah, we've got a big story to talk about first. South Carolina Representative R.J. May, a Lexington County Republican who co-founded the House Freedom Caucus, was indicted on federal charges of distributing child sex abuse material. This was the big story that broke Thursday morning. This is something that's been talked about for nearly a year after his house was raided. And because of the types of organizations that were involved in the raid, there was a lot of speculation that it may involve child sex abuse material, and that is indeed what they were looking for. And if you believe the feds, they found some. So May will remain in a Lexington County jail as he awaits his federal trial on 10 counts of distributing child sex abuse material. U.S. Magistrate Judge Shiva Hodges said Thursday that the weight of evidence against May is significant, and she cited his international travels and the danger he possibly poses to himself, his two young children, and of course to other children, and that is why he will remain in jail. He was arrested at his West Columbia home on Wednesday, which was about 10 months after his house was raided back in August of 2024. That raid was done by U.S. Homeland Security investigation agents. They ended up seizing various electronic devices such as cell phones, hard drives, a CD, and thumb drives. May, for his part, has entered a plea of not guilty, and he did so at Columbia's federal courthouse on Thursday. Now, we're going to get into some of the details of the indictment. Nothing, besides the overarching charges that he has. I'm not going to get into those types of details, because obviously that's not something we need to discuss. But one thing I found I don't know what the proper word is, but it's just because these are really horrific, crimes, distributing child sex abuse material, possessing it. But the way he went about it and a username that he tried to use, it just adds another layer to it. So the indictment said that May, who, by the way, is 38 years old, used a username. I'm chuckling because, again, it's just so bizarre. But the username he went by was Joe Biden with several N's and Biden 69. So Joe Biden 69 was a username. He also used an alias of Eric Rentling, whatever that, wherever that came up with. He came up with that one. And he used that username and that alias to exchange files containing child sexual abuse material on social messaging app called Kik. So he's using that app and those usernames. And, again, just family values, Freedom Caucus Republican trying to use Joe Biden as his screen name. In any event, the U.S. Attorney's Office of South Carolina said investigators were able to trace the app account to May's home IP address and cell phone, identifying at least 10 videos showing child sex abuse that were shared from the account. The charges carry prison terms of 5 to 20 years if convicted. He also faces a potential fine of $250,000 plus up to 5 years of supervised release. Federal prosecutors said the evidence is strong enough that May likely faces a long prison sentence if he is indeed convicted. And if you're wondering, yes, as required by law, House Speaker Merle Smith, who is a Republican from Sumter, suspended May from office without pay. However, he did not comment on that any further. So, yeah, that's the big story. Again, it's been in the rumor mill for a while, so not a surprise that it finally happened, but, still big news, still shocking. And it'd be shocking when any person does it, but especially a politician. And when that politician is part of the Republican Party, but more specific than that, part of this Freedom Caucus, which bills itself on family values, and more specifically, were some of the most vocal critics against things like, drag shows or drag story hour, anti-trans people. They're always trying to pass anti-trans, anti-gay legislation. And then, they're the ones that are always screaming about groomers and, the crazy left. They're just trying to groom children, calling them pedophiles and all these things. And then lo and behold, one of them the group that shouts the loudest, one of their members is at least alleged to have been doing the types of things that they scream others are doing. But obviously, more importantly, it's the crime itself, the alleged crime. He's going to have his day in court. He said he's not guilty. We'll certainly see how it plays out, and I will keep you updated. But as usually when it comes to federal crimes like this, they've got something. The feds generally don't try to bring charges if they don't have anything. So it's not looking good for him. And, like I said, I will certainly keep you updated. Switching gears completely, the last episode, the big story, was not as serious. It had to do with the study of were restaurants actually serving local shrimp. And of 44 restaurants that were tested, only 4 were actually serving local shrimp from South Carolina waters. Now, a couple updates. One, what I'm going to talk about in a moment is what local shrimpers are saying. And I do want to say a few people have reached out to me directly or have made comments like, what were the 40 restaurants that were not serving local shrimp? Well, as I mentioned in the last episode, the group that did the study did not release the names of those restaurants. That's why they're not being shared. And then there's some others saying, well, it's also not fair because our restaurant serves local shrimp, but we just weren't one of the ones that were tested. And so if it wasn't clear when I did the last episode or the post I wrote about it wasn't clear, even though I think both were. But you know how the internet is. A lot of people don't read full articles. They just read the headline. So, yeah, no, that stinks. If you were one of the restaurants that actually serves local shrimp and you weren't tested, it's possible people might just assume you're not. And based on the numbers from that testing, I would understand why someone may think that. So, the best way for places to make sure their customers know that they serve local shrimp is by, maybe posting about it, showing a picture of the box, showing hey, this is where it came from, and, whatever it may be. They can't request to be tested because that would defeat the purpose of it. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there in case it wasn't clear. But anyway, local shrimpers are upset, which should lead you to believe that this problem is, percentage-wise, probably extrapolates out to something like that small sample size was, which, again, is not to say that every restaurant that wasn't listed doesn't serve local shrimp because they just weren't tested. But local shrimpers are still upset, and they're calling for more transparency, which would, of course, help everyone, including restaurants who are like, well, I wish we got tested because we're doing the right thing. And as I mentioned in the last episode, there's no law in South Carolina against that kind of false advertising. But they're, the industry is hoping that may change. So News 2 did a story with some local shrimpers, and they said that deception is obviously unfair to their community and their consumers. And we're calling for more transparency, like I said. One person they spoke to is Cynthia Tarvin, who is the owner of Tarvin Seafood. She said, I think that's harmful to the community. I think it's harmful to the shrimpers that are really working hard to provide a great product. And for the record, Tarvin Seafood on their Instagram, maybe other social media, I just saw it on their Instagram, posted a list of restaurants that buy local shrimp from them, and it may have even been other seafoods as well. And it was a pretty extensive list, which led me to wonder, did really none of these restaurants get tested because it was a good amount? Or did maybe some of them get tested, and sure, they do buy local product from Tarvin, but they also get product from other sources? That's always a possibility as well. Where they're like, oh, we've got the money for local shrimp. We can afford this much, but we're not going to be able to get as much as we want. Let's get some of the cheaper stuff from this place instead. So, who knows? But if you're interested, go check out that list. Those are the people that are at least buying some product from Tarvin. So that's a good way to see as well who is, again, at least, attempting to do it, if maybe not all year round, or maybe not every single piece of shrimp in their restaurant came from Tarvin, but at least some of it did. So anyway, I encourage you to go look at their social media. And yeah, this is obviously an unethical practice. The shrimpers agree with it. They don't want restaurants to falsely advertise that they're selling locally, caught shrimp when they're not, and that there should be some changes. And I agree. Another update, this one about the Dockside condominium situation. So apparently fixing the structural issues that force residents of that condominium tower to evacuate could end up costing about $151 million. This is according to the building's homeowner association, and then was reported by local media. For those who need a quick update, back in February, about 200 residents were forced from their homes inside what is, believe it or not, Charleston's tallest building, other than some church steeples, of course. And also people in the surrounding townhomes had to evacuate as well after engineers found that the condo tower was unsafe. The evacuated owners are still in the process of gathering their possessions from the 19-story building, but will soon have to make a difficult decision. Do they want to repair the building or sell, their condo? A spokeswoman for the Buildings Association Board said that all owners will first consider whether to repair the structural issues. There's been no set date made yet for holding that vote, but the spokeswoman said it would likely take place in the early summer, so should be relatively soon. The repair bill would be apportioned across all homeowners, or condo owners, rather. That includes not only the tower's 112 condominiums, but also those surrounding 21 townhomes, which don't have the same structural deficiencies. So that's obviously an argument. Remember, the last update was the people in the townhomes, like, why are we evacuating? We don't have structural issues. I would imagine the city's thought process was, well, if this tower collapses, it could injure people on the ground and or damage their homes. But they are challenging that they shouldn't have been evacuated. And now, of course, they're probably thinking the same in the same vein of, wait, there's nothing wrong with where I'm living. Why do I have to help pay for the tower? So there's going to be some arguments and fights about this, I'm sure. But getting back to the details, each owner's share of the bill is based on their ownership percentage of the building, which varies by condo. So a larger apartment, say, may have more than a 1% share, meaning that the owner could pay more than $1.5 million for the repairs. So even though it's going to be split amongst everyone who's living there, some may end up paying a little bit more. And so, yeah, ultimately some people may decide to sell. So this Dockside drama is not going anywhere anytime soon. I'm sure we'll have plenty of updates over the next few months. Of course, that next update will be if they take a vote, are we going to do the repairs? And then we'll see what happens from there. And the last story today, we've talked about South Carolina and the death penalty over and over again. First, as a state got back to executing people. And now that the firing squad is one of the options. We've had a couple of convicted inmates who ended up choosing that as their manner of death. And part of this story is par for the course. Any lawyer who's trying to do their job appropriately for someone on death row is trying to, do best for the client and get at least get the whole death penalty thrown out. Like, if the client has to stay in jail for the rest of their life, well, they'll take that over the client dying by execution. So But it also raises some questions because firing squad is new in a sense, because it's not something that was used in this state. So, according to lawyers for the next man who is set to be executed, and that man's name is Steven Stanko, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the last man who was executed is Mikhail Mahdi. And according to Stanko's lawyers, when the three executioners fired their high-powered rifles at him, he ended up yelling, and then over the next 80 seconds, he moaned twice more before drawing his final gasping breath. Now, if you're wondering, Mahdi was sentenced to death for the execution-style murder of an Orangeburg police officer. And as I always talk about in these stories, I know it's hard to have sympathy for someone who did something that horrific. But I always, as I've talked about before, I kind of side on we shouldn't be killing people even if they've done horrific things. It's just not something I necessarily believe in. But I also understand the flip side to that. So I'm just noting, I know it's hard to have, sympathy for someone who's committed such a horrific crime. But nonetheless, if you don't think people should be killed in cruel and unusual ways, when you hear a situation like that, it does sound relatively cruel. So anyway, protocol requires that executioners aim for the inmate's heart when they're, when they're in what's called the death chamber. But despite those 3 shots that are supposed to happen, an autopsy revealed only partial damage to Mahdi's heart and just 2 bullet entry wounds. Where's the third? So Stanko's lawyers are saying this is proof that only 2 bullets were even fired and both missed their mark. Now, they didn't offer any motive. There's been no statement of, from the prison system or the state that, we only load up 2 guns or no, this is false. The third bullet was, it did miss, but we found it in I hate to keep saying this term, but it is what they call it, the death chamber. There's been no, so we don't really know what the story is with that. But nonetheless, if there were 3 shots, none of them seem to really hit their mark. And for someone, these are supposed to be people who are marksmen. They are supposed to be able to do something like this, especially, as close as they are to the person when this happens. So they're using that to say that this is cruel and unusual punishment and that, it shouldn't be happening, and they want to save their client from, being executed. Now, despite all that, their client has ended up choosing lethal injection, but kind of said that that's really the only option, and they have questions about that too, because the other option besides firing squad is the electric chair, and they said this is they don't believe any of these are constitutional, but this is the one that their client decided had the chance of causing the least amount of pain and distress. So they also claim that it would be nearly impossible for trained marksmen to accidentally miss a target at such close range. That they said they've spoke to people. So they're also saying, for 3 people to completely miss, something is wrong here, whether it was intentional or not, which again, I'm not, co-signing that anything intentional happened here, but that's something they're alleging could be happening. So as I said, as a result, Stanko's lawyers argue that Mahdi died an agonizing death of blood loss, and they're hoping that their client can avoid being executed, period. They have said that they're seeking a stay of execution for their 54-year-old client. I doubt they're going to get a stay. So far, every single one of these men who have been sentenced to death and have been given a date of execution, as usual, they've all attempted, through their lawyers, to get a stay of execution or something to prevent it from happening. And most of the time they're arguing that this violates constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment, and each time it gets shot down. And it appears that even if they're coming forward with another example of why they think an execution went poorly and that there should be some answers here and some changes, I don't see this happening. If you're wondering, Stanko was sentenced to death in Horry and Georgetown counties for the murders of his girlfriend, whose name was Laura Ling, and a friend whose name was Henry Turner. So again, I'm not expecting anything to happen here, but I did want to update you all on what they claim happened at the last execution, and also let you know that they are requesting a stay, par for the course. Doubtful that they'll get it, but you never know. And that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Soundsystem for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. Hope you have a good Friday the 13th, an even better weekend. Again, if you need plans, holycitycenter.com/calendar is where you want to go. Also, if you have a moment, whatever you can do as far as interacting with this podcast on whatever platform you're listening on, that would be a big help for me. Things like rating the podcast, reviewing it, sharing it with friends, subscribing, all that stuff helps out, and I appreciate it. I'll be back with you next week. I'm already looking forward to it, but until then, good night and good luck.